widespread violence and intimidation of voters in the rural areas, the abduction and torture of many opposition activists, the continued detention of members of parliament of the opposition. Will the UK government be rather less equivocal and make absolutely clear that it does not regard these elections as free and fair, that the government of Zimbabwe has no legitimacy, and as long as it is the case, it will not be readmitted to the Commonwealth as far as Britain is concerned, and that we will work with SADC colleagues to try and find resolutions to the problem?
And on this, the Free Talk, we take you through the voices that matter. That is everyone's voice, including yours. Zimbabwe has been under the rule of ZANU-PF for the past 43 years. Now, that rule has been extended by another 5-year term following the win that was recorded by President Emmerson Mnangagwa on the August 23-24 general elections. Now, President Emmerson Mnangagwa will run this country for the next 5 years. Now, we're going to be discussing what this means for the people of Zimbabwe. Is there anything for all of us to look up to? Is there anything for all of us to frown? This is the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. Now, join me after this break as we go into detail. Welcome back to this, the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. Now we are going to be looking at the 5 years ahead. People, power, and delivery under ZANU-PF regime. Now joining me in studio is one controversial columnist, political analyst, and a good friend of mine, Rejoice Ngwenya. Thank you very much, Rejoice, for joining me.
Thanks very much, Blessing. I didn't know that I was controversial, but controversy is subjective, obviously.
Yeah, but let's just, before we delve into this, you used to write, sharp, stinging columns, especially in the Newsday. Where did those columns go?
Well, look, writing is generational. Because you need to understand that what is your audience, who are they, what do they understand? So you can see that the late 90s and the 2000s, there was a new generation of political thinking that was excited and excitable. So this is the kind of fuel that was inspiring me to express myself. And remember that the Mugabe dictatorship also brought out the animal in me. But as the adage says, as you grow older, you begin to be more, conservative and more, calculating. Not that there is any fear effect or anything, but why not just create space for new thinking and explore other avenues.
You speak about new thinking, Joyce. Now we've been under the rule of one ruling party since we attained independence in 1980, and now we are in 2023 under the same. Now you've lived through this regime, right?
Luckily.
Yeah, luckily you. Now just talk to us, so that we have an understanding. Maybe if you have any stages, post independence, the early days, the middle, and the end of Mugabe era, and the start of the Mnangagwa.
Do you know, when people are talking about ZANU-PF being in power for 43 years, they miss one incredible point. There are different types of ZANU-PFs that have presented themselves over the past 40 years. You know, obviously, the kind of ZANU that we saw before independence was completely different from what we saw at independence. The post-independence ZANU-PF was a bit dignified, minus the Kukuraundi issue. Now, this is why people like Mugabe were kind of like acceptable in international forums. You know, he was actually knighted at one time. You know, this you're talking about the Lakenster House type of ZANU-PF. Then there was a ZANU-PF that created individuals like Tekere, Herbert Shokunze. That was very not necessarily revolutionary, but very active in the way they understood social constructs, and it was very intellectual. This is the ZANU-PF that transited from Lakenster House to the new type of constitution that brought in executive presidency. And at that time, blessed, we used to tolerate them. You know, politics was not for us, the middle incomers. You know, we were driving fancy cars. You know, okay, that's on 120 where I was fancy. And the Women's League was meant to drive the political agenda. So we were not supposed to be seen, you know, singing at rallies and doing all sorts of things. That particular generation, you know, the Joel Shambo, Shekman Taoro, Friday Piri type of era. But I kept an eye on that sort of ZANU-PF because I could sense that there was something about the Mugabe mentality that was becoming more and more extreme. His language was hardening towards Joshua Nkomo, calling him all sorts of names. I did not really, my activism did not start at that time. You know, I've always been, for instance, an activist, been in Botswana and Kenya where I went to college. But, there was a certain degree of freeness that we enjoyed, you know, during that era. It began to tighten up a bit when the civic movement began to be more democratically oriented, you know, mid-1990s. And trade unionism was seen in the streets. And the trade unionism was now divided between anti-ZANU and pro-ZANU. So you can see there's an evolution of the type of ZANU-PF that we're talking about here. By the time we hit the late 1990s, during the first Constitutional Commission era, this was the kind of ZANU-PF that was saying to us, okay, you guys, you want to change the Constitution, go ahead and do it because we don't want NCA to do it. So you had Zobo picking up the phone and talking to Morgan Tsvangirai, to Welshman Ngove and company, and so forth. And remember, that's the time that the Lupim Karara writing era came. And this is where my writing began to be exciting because I wanted to participate in that transformation. You know, and the ZANU-PF then spilled over into 2000. The ZANU-PF of fear that was being driven by the fear of political competition. And for the first time, ZANU-PF began to say, goodness me, let's look behind us, there is competition. And the rest is history. So I love to have lived all through that generation. And I have lots and lots of stories to talk about, but I'm not sure whether I can write about it because there are more better things to write about. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but as we look at the transition from the post, just after independence, and the mid-career Mugabe, right? Let us just talk about that transition and its effect to Zimbabwean politics today.
This is where we miss the boat, Blessed. You know, politics and this revolution is driven by, it's to do with generation and age, right? So the fact that we were so comfortable in our corporate environments I'm talking about the middle income here. It meant that we subcontracted political activism to, I would have wanted to say illiterates, but I would say semi-literates in terms of political understanding. So we allowed politics to go to the dogs. So if we had taken time to sit down and said we want mature politics, remember that's the era where the economy was a bit vibrant. The fruits were fresh and juicy, and we had lots and lots of money to spend. So we didn't really have much time to focus on politics as a way of life, because politics and economics were very different. You know, you can talk about other things, but I believe that era politics and economics were different. So we had two generations, the generation of the Mujibas that had come to town and were living on ZANU-PF benevolence, and they were driving the ZANU-PF political program. And then there was us, the educated elites, who used to buy newspapers and watch TV and so forth. And we allowed then politics to slide into the corridors of what would I call it? Vagrancy. But looking back, I can't say to myself I should have done better, but I didn't know what else to do, because the economy was very vibrant. I didn't need politics for me to survive. The mortgages were flying. We could get cars on HP, and we could fly all over the world on Air Zimbabwe on hire purchase. So the transition happened in our absence. In other words, we were not there to birth a new political thinking, but our education and our intellectual maturity helped us to understand why ZANU-PF was beginning to change. Because Zobho started talking about constitutionalism at that time, explaining why it is necessary for executive presidency, explaining why it is necessary for people to understand, what governance is about. And we began to set up, to sit up and listen. But
sorry, Joyce, there's different type of politics in Zimbabwe,
right,
and South Africa. In South Africa, where the citizens go to the streets, where they demand service delivery and stuff like that, where in South Africa even the thinking of probably rigging elections is not really something that people would think of because of that vibrancy that is there. What has taken the sting out of Zimbabwean politics, in your view?
I think let me go back to the university and say, student activism was very critical because it took anger into the streets. If you notice, the street politics was shared between trade unions and the UZ, right? And Mugabe was quite aware of that. And remember that the South African politics, the sort of the UDM trade union, civic-driven politics was not. We are not part of that generation. We were not cultured around that. We were cultured around a situation that politics is driven by the nationalist, and if they are not there, there is nothing much to say. So even the absence of Joshua Nkomo, you notice that when Joshua Nkomo died, there's a certain spirit that died with him in terms of our enthusiasm. Right. So I would say that maybe the death of student politics is the one that took the excitement out of the streets and brought in more caution and fear. And mind you, most Zimbabweans at that time were relatively educated. The post-independence generation was relatively educated. And like I was saying, Blessed, why would a marketing assistant from a brewery company be seen running around in the streets? Nana Mujiba. So we were, we were proud. We were selfish, and this is where the politicians hijacked that agenda and killed student activism. So we could not be able to support students in the streets up until the time that the NCA came in, and Isaac Maposa and these guys began to instigate some kind of revolutionary mentality in students. But still, it was not good enough to instigate national, revolution. Why? Because people were saying this is student politics. There's a Uber, It's either you are Uber or you are NCA. So we can't be part of that, or you are trade unions, right? And trade unions are not associated with the middle income. They are associated with the semi-skilled worker. So you can see these structures complicated, our lives in terms of understanding what is it that we can do to participate in the political movement. So South Africans are not very educated, but they also come from a generation of the UDM generation that was brought up by student activism.
Now let us look at present-day Zimbabwe. We've seen so much activism on social media space.
True.
And there's criticism that this will not transform the country. What is your view on that?
Dara, that is a lie. I'm saying so. The weapon of first choice during our generation, the University of Rhodesia generation, the kind of generation that Mutsangwa always talks about. That we left college in our weapon of first choice was an AK-47. Right. I mean, the fact that you go to Mozambique or to Zambia, the first thing that you'd be given an echo, you sort of like weigh it up and see whether you can carry it. If it's too heavy, they say, you're still too young. But what I'm saying now is that the weapon of first choice is now the smartphone, the keyboard. We are moving into the AI generation, the 5th generation. And I've got a feeling that that critical energy has not been tapped. You can cause a revolution through the digital media.
Do you think those with guns care?
But how many are they? I'm talking about cell phone density here. There are probably 12 million cell phones in the hands of citizens. But how many AK-47s are there? And what can you do with the digital media? How much can you hack the system? How much can you bring down any system using artificial intelligence? So you don't actually, this is borderless. If economy and trade, blessed, are borderless, then the revolution is borderless. And there must be a way of young people trying to understand that let's use those weapons that are closest to us on our hands. It's not an AK-47 anymore. It's artificial intelligence. It's the cell phone. What can you do with it? So I've heard people complaining that most young people are keyboard activists. And I'm like, that's good, because that is the only thing they have. They spend about 60% of their spare time on the smartphone. The only difference now is how to understand what is it that you can do to use that instrument as a revolution. And if you can break that barrier, you're home and dry. I tell you what, we will never get AK-47. We are never going to get bases in Mozambique and Zambia. But the young people can use their mastery in understanding how to use the digital media as a revolution. And if they can't think about that, they are condemned to eternal poverty, I'm afraid.
Mm-hmm. Now, let us zero in on this use of social media.
Right.
The sense that you get is that when you go through it, there's so much anger, there's so much hate.
True.
And at one point you believe that those who are seeking to change the world for better are actually becoming the beast that they are fighting with the way that they exchange words.
Right. Yeah, true. I mean, social media is a wonderful invention, blessed. I mean, this is what I keep saying, that we don't want to look at social media as a medium of entertainment and just communication. It is transformative. Do you know that in my generation of the 60s and 70s, we used to have something we used to call pen pal. It was a simple concept. You take a 35mm shot of yourself, and you post it into a magazine, parade. You put your address and somebody responds to it. And Mark Zuckerberg thought, gee, why don't I just make this digital? And he caused a revolution. In other words, if you can change political thinking through Facebook and X and Instagram, why can't there be political transition through that? It's a pity. This is why these nationalists know that. That's why they are not allowing us to use these things for voting because they know what they can do. Imagine how much more voter you can add onto the voters' roll if you just use your cell phone to vote. Imagine how much attitudes and sentiments you can change on the cell phone. You don't need physical rallies. So I believe that, and I think the young people they are too, sunken in their misery. They can't. Of course, we were like in the 70s. You look around and say, "Geez, with all this war, what is my future like? What do I do next?" But we didn't allow misery to destroy our enthusiasm for transformation and change. And this is what I'm saying, that the young generation is not the lost generation. It's not the least generation. It's not the last generation. It's a transformative generation, which George Aite used to call it the cheetah generation. All they are waiting to do, like Zuckerberg, they are waiting to discover themselves how best they can change their circumstances. I am not saying that they shouldn't go and work in London or in Centon. They can do that. But the revolution is now borderless. So it is important that they adopt this unit as an item for change.
Let us look also now at where we are going, Rejoice. President Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa has renewed his mandate for the next 5 years. What do you see unfolding in the next 5 years, Rejoice?
When we were discussing about this talk before I came, I was saying I'm going to remind Blessed that I used to watch a lot of horror movies, but Alfred Hitchcock was my best because he created the necessary environments. And when I'm listening to young people talk these days, they graduate, they have no jobs. You have a bit of an experience, you have no job, right? And most of them are indulging in drugs and all that. I'm saying this is a horror movie, right? And I would have been happy if our horror movie had finished this year and we open a new chapter of hope and enthusiasm, but it's not going to happen. So the circumstances that our young children are facing, you want to be conservative and say they are grim circumstances, because the situation is not going to get any better. Why I'm saying so? Because why would a person who was in power for 38 years with Mugabe and took over power in 2017 and takes over power now, why would they suddenly realize that there is a need to change?
Is there no need to change, to leave a legacy?
No. People in ZANU-PF, Blessed, are not really bothered about legacy, because legacy is a sign of a good conscience. It's a good feel thing that Mandela said, I'm a one-term president. I want to leave a legacy of that democracy is exciting and democracy can be exchanged. Somebody can get into my seat and feel comfortable because he had a conscience. These guys, when I was watching the gold mafia, I was saying to myself, these guys have dead souls. Their thinking capacity has been reduced to, in computers we say binary digits 0 and 1. To them it's about money, to zeros. How many zeros are in my bank account? He understands that. But because he knows that there's a generation of young people who are always prepared to go away, to leave the country. And he's quite happy. That's why they keep saying, Basingali Zanu Ngababud. But we cannot all go out of the country as young people. Not all young people can go out of the country. So they need to sit down and say, how do we reinvent ourselves? I am a liberal, and our belief is that governments don't create employment, but governments create conditions that are conducive for young people. There is no country that can survive without the exciting skills of young people. It's just like international soccer. The next World Cup is going to be composed, average age is going to be about 22, 23, 24, right? So there's no economy that can run without young people. So it is the responsibility of the young people to look at their circumstances and say, how do we change it? We are not going to do that for them. We did our part. We might have messed up in the first 10 years of independence, but that was our thinking. So we cannot leave our so-called comfort zones now as the elderly and think for them. We can sympathize with them, but they now need to transform themselves. And one important thing they have to deal with now is the fear factor. They should not be afraid. They should not be afraid to confront the system and say, you have kept us as graduates, but what conditions are they that can make us get jobs? We have not graduated to be cleaning, to be social workers in England, or to be waiters in Centon. We want to live in our country. We want to enjoy the wealth of our country.
But President Emerson Mnangagwa is saying that he's doing all this, he's improving the quality of people's life by growing the economy, using the mining sector to growing it to a $12 billion mining sector. His mantra or punchline is leaving no one and no place behind. Why would anyone confront such a loving leader?
Yeah, of course, we call it, that in advertising, call them payoff lines. Do you know when I'm listening to Mnangagwa and Mthuli Ncube talk about the economy, I'm looking at my two sons, you know, who are university graduates. I'm saying, how does their mantra of leaving no one behind translate themselves into disposable income of my children's pockets? You know, a medical doctor who cannot sustain himself, it really is a waste of time. So all these narratives and mantras about developing Zimbabwe, about big, you know, mega deals, about infrastructure, as long as they don't translate into disposable income in our children's pockets, as long as that cannot get our children, do you know, Blessed, even getting an attachment is almost impossible now in a typical environment, right? They are students offering themselves for free to enhance their education qualifications, but they can't get attachment. So who is benefiting in the economy? Who is benefiting from this Zimbabwe is opening for business? Because my children are not benefiting. My neighbor is not benefiting. You know, my other friends are not benefiting.
But just how do you say that? We've seen big mansions sprouting up in the leafy suburbs of Zimbabwe. We've seen, just looking out of this studio through the window, you will see like SUVs. You know, the most expensive cars are on our streets.
True.
Are you lazy?
I actually even see Ferraris, you know, in the streets of Harare. But then you see, the question being, this is why my question is, who actually is benefiting? Where are these guys getting the money from when industry is dead? Because when I'm assessing the health of an economy, I'm looking at the industry. I want to go to Southerton and see 24-hour industries working. I want to go to Granite Side and see young men and young women getting out of factories doing shifts. Right? I don't want to go to Kwekwe, to the Midlands, and see young men coming out of halls carrying gold. That to me is not development. I don't want to go to Goromonzi and see Chinese loading lithium rock into trucks, lithium rock going to China, and meanwhile the local economy is dead. So there are specific milestones, Blessed, of development, and they are not showing. I don't want to go to Parerenyato and see old women spending 5 hours in the queue waiting for treatment. I know that they are private hospitals, but they are not meant for them. You know, I don't want to go to Matapi, to Mbare, to see sewage running over the streets and small children skipping over puddles of sewage. So I keep asking myself, right, I go to Glenlone, I see 4-story buildings, and that's a teeny-weeny population of Zimbabwe. Those are the individuals that either have access to gold or lithium, or they are professionals that are in the diaspora. And a teeny-weeny bit of and those are not the people that vote, mind you, Blessed. When we are talking about the voters' roll of 6 million people, we are talking about the average guy who has no job, who has no employment, and so forth.
That average guy is voting for ZANU-PF, and I think they're saying something good about them, is it not?
Yeah, the Stockholm Syndrome. This is one of the most important truths that you have said. You are one of the few political, journalists who understands that ZANU-PF has people that vote for them. Some of the numbers they cook, but most of them they don't create. The question being, why do they vote for them? Why does my Mzukuru who stays in Shurugwi vote for ZANU-PF? Because he is intimidated to vote. He is told that if you don't vote for me, this is the fear factor I was saying, blessed, that we had Ian Smith telling us that as well as teenagers, that if you continue being supporting these boys, we are going to kill you. And he used to kill people for that. But you need to break that cycle of fear. You need to convince yourself that there is a relationship, blessed, between your vote and your economic status. And until the young people understand that in the rural areas, because 2/3 of the voters are generally based in the rural areas, but there are not enough people in urban centers who register to vote. I mean, there are probably about 1 or 2 million urbanites who don't register to vote, and they can change the electoral circumstances. But we are focusing on the individual who votes for ZANU-PF. It's almost like saying, why do you have a person paying tithe to a church whose leader puts the money in the pocket? Because it's going to say to you, I am paying tithe to God, right? So he doesn't associate his tithe with his circumstances. So the person who votes for ZANU-PF in the rural area says, I'm voting for a revolutionary party. They have promised me fertilizer, gejo, and so forth. So that ability to discern the relationship between the vote and your economic circumstance is the one that allows those people to vote. Of course, in fear. They need to exercise their fear. The more they fear, the more these politicians entrench their authority. Unless they get rid of their fear, they are going to remain under those circumstances, blessed.
Now just join us just after this small break where I'm going to talk to Rejoice Ngwenya about President Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa is a last-term president in a ZANU-PF with different matrix. What does that look like? Just join me after this break. Right, welcome back to this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. Now, as usual, I'm your host, Dara B. Now, I'm talking to Rejoice Ngwenya, a political analyst, a columnist, and as he also calls himself, an activist. He's been an activist since his childhood, as a Zimbabwean, also studying abroad, and also as he worked in Zimbabwe. I'm sure all your life, Rejoice, most of it rather, if I say all, it's like it has ended. Most of it, Rejoice, you've been working in the civil society space. True. And educating people about civic space. How has it been?
It has been fun, really. I mean, I wasn't really geared for civil society work, because, having a marketing background and so forth, advertising, it was all corporate and all that. But because of my writings and my interest in music, I began to enjoy social commentary, and sort of like in the late 1980s, I was doing lots and lots of artwork. I do a lot of art and writing lots about music, on music and so forth.
Your hair explains.
My hair explains, yeah. So, but it was like in the late 1990s that I stumbled into typical civil society work. I was, running a magazine, for Lupim Karara, she was also a very good writer who taught me how to write politics. And she had a project on freedom, which excited me, So I started going around with her in communities, talking about freedom. It's a subject that I already knew because I was a political activist anyway, talking about freedom and writing about it and so forth. So then she had a partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation, who I should say that they did well to identify my talent and interest in conversations around democracy. So they immediately took me up, huge training programs all over the world. And I began to understand, democratization and civil society as transformative. In other words, I for the first time, I could see that you can transform people's lives by making them understand what freedom is about. Democratic activism, that is not political. because you need to talk to all political ideologies, understand all ideologies. Although I fell in love with liberalism because it has a different perspective of how you understand. So Zimbabweans get excited about talking issues about freedom, although they can't transform that into political, transformation, and because their knowledge of ideology was also not very sharp. So it was an opportunity for me to go out there and say, look here, guys, there is more to life than communism, socialism. Remember, it was ZIPRA, communism, ZANU-PF, Marxist-Leninism. So the nationalists brought two types of ideologies. And, the old school of thought, the Igbo Mandazas, rose to socialism, those programs. They had created a mono side of ideology. So the activism, that new life that was introduced to me through work with the Fred Norman Foundation, brought excitement around issues of democratization and activism.
There's some people who argue, that organizations like the Frederick Newman Foundation are Western and they buy people and, to influence people against their governments. What would be your...
I always hear the story that even ZANU-PF will say to you, we brought democracy. You know what I mean? Issues of ideology are foreign, are alien. But the bottom line, my thinking and my guiding principle when I was working, doing some work in the community with Freedom Foundation was that we are talking about freedom. What is it like to be free? How do you understand freedom as an individual? What is it that you do to show that you are free? So unless if somebody is telling me that freedom is imported, which is wrong, because the reason why the nationalists went to war was because they were fighting against autocratic dictatorship. They were fighting for freedom,
which they had enjoyed before the dictatorship came.
You see, but of course that's a long time back. Our lives, as traditional lives in the 1890s, we were pretty free. We had skirmishes here and there based on clanism and tribal wars. But Africans understood democracy and freedom. Our fate was discussed by an institution called Padare, where all people were meant to sit and discuss. Even a simple process like a marriage ceremony, everybody was there. So institutions like Fred Norman Foundation, what they simply do is they institutionalize knowledge of freedom and allow you to cross-pollinate ideologies, to understand the difference between communism and socialism, liberal democracy, social democracy. I think to me it's a good investment, Blessed. And this is what they do. These institutions don't impose democracy on us, because already we are democratic. We like to consult, we like to talk about it, we enjoy our freedoms, but we need to find a way of institutionalizing it and constitutionalizing it, so that when we write constitutions, when we debate laws, when we talk about our future, about industrialization, we understand the impact of freedom on individualism. So those that say that international agencies like Fred Norman Foundation, USAID and all that, they impose freedom on us, are talking on their behalf, because their agenda is to occupy our minds, is to colonize our minds for their benefit. They don't want institutions that enlighten people. So these guys don't come to, they talk to us. We are the individuals that go into the community and say, what do you understand of freedom? What do you understand about democracy? When you say elections are free and fair and integral, what does it understand? But you need to be trained to do that. They simply skill us on the methods of facilitation and engagement.
Now let us talk about this occupying space for their own benefit. President Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa is a last-term president in a ZANU-PF that has its own matrix. What do you foresee?
Look, it's said that he has accepted the second term. I mean, if he was magnanimous, like I said of Nelson Mandela, he would have said, guys, I participated in the transition from the First to the Second Republic, and I've learned my lessons. And I want to leave you guys with my experience, with your experience, to establish a new political arrangement. The kind of opportunity that he missed in 2017, when there was so much moral and political support, both local, regionally, and internationally. Now, what is going to happen now in his last term? Hopefully, he's not going to want to change the constitution again for the third term. You can't put it past nationalists, blessed. We have to keep one eye open. He's going to be retracting now into his own space, a space of fear and distrust and mistrust, because he is now saying, whoever is coming in, are they going to be able to protect my interests? So that introspection can translate into deeper authoritarianism. So it is a dangerous space that we are in now, a space where he might not trust anybody. So by not trusting anybody, he will want to have legislation that tightens what you would call the loose ends, so that even his successors, it might even be difficult to even talk about successors, because you don't want to groom competition if you're a nationalist. So to me, blessed, it's not it's not worth celebrating that is on his last term. I wish that he had given up and allowed a new generation in ZANU-PF to take over. But this space that he has brought himself in, I think it's going to get him to retract more and more into an authoritarian mode that is going to make life more and more difficult for the citizens of this country.
Now that his re-election was also challenged and was so labeled a sham election by close allies, SADC, by the AU, and traditionally also the EU and the Commonwealth. But does this make him a weak president?
Look, he knows that when you want to claim legitimacy, you need to have an overwhelming support that is undisputed. And he knows that by tinkering around with various pieces of legislation, the Patriotic Act, PVO bill and all that, he was narrowing the democratic space and setting himself up for criticism. He knows that. He knows that by allowing the judiciary and the system to make it more difficult for political competition, it was creating more and more suspicion. It's not like he doesn't know that his election was going to be disputed. Even ZEC itself understood, they know that there is good reason why this election is disputed. Right? So it's going to make him very uncomfortable. And for the first time, blessed, SADC has set back, maybe for the second time after 2008, to say, do we really want to be associated with this? They've been asking questions. And that makes him weak, not only locally but regionally. I mean, how do you sit in the SADC presidential team and feel yourself as a peer or as an equal when you know that your colleagues are suspicious of you?
You said they don't have souls.
Unfortunately, maybe they don't have souls, but look, I think the humanity in them. I see that Chisano was here, Ramaphosa was here, but you can sense his body language. You can sense that his body language is not very confident. But what I'm saying that just because SADC is gone out of its way for the first time and say we are not so sure that this election the process is legitimate. We are questioning your credibility around the table of honorable men. But most of them are not necessarily honorable. But they can lay claim to that our elections were not disputed by SADC. So that makes him a wee bit weaker. And if he had good advisors, they would say to him, why don't you, before you start gallivanting around the region, waving your flag of victory, why don't you go back home and sit down with the guys and say, okay, guys, what is it that you want me to do? This is what humility and magnanimity means in leadership. But then, like I said, that because of that retractive, stance that he's going to take, it's not going to get any better for him. He needs to face the elephant in the room. My position has been discredited by international observers, and I am sure there are alternatives. What is it that I can do? ask and he's going to get his reply.
As you speak about this, I'm just reminded of the appointments that we made. Vice President Constantino Chiwenga, Vice President Kembo Mohadi. What tone does this give to you?
Do you now understand, Blessed, why sometimes people say Mugabe was a dictator, but he had a bit of depth? You know, I do not use conscience because that doesn't exist in ZANU-PF. But the way that Mugabe used to manipulate, you know, institutions, there was a semblance. Because remember Mugabe, because remember Kopak was under the Mugabe tenure. In other words, he actually allowed citizens to galvanize themselves, although he knew that he was not going to listen to what the Constitution says, but he allowed it to happen. Right. So even his appointments were very clever, were very intelligent. You know, in a way, Joyce Mjuru, so and so. You know, he didn't want to bring in hardcore competition into his you know, environment, but they had a semblance of intelligence. Now, when you now go back into the archives and appoint people like Mpogo and Chiwenga in a second term.
Mohadi, not
Mohadi. You are showing us that you are not prepared to transform yourself and the environment around you. This is why I'm not going to be surprised if the cabinet is going to be shockingly familiar, because he has established a rhythm of mediocrity. We have a president who is about to finish his last term, but with a whimper. You know, if he had brought in a new generation of vice presidents, and if he's going to bring a new generation of cabinet ministers, he's going to be finishing big. We are going to say, this man made our life miserable, but he's finishing in style. But then again, that culture does not exist in ZANU-PF. So he's luring and attracting blame and spite to himself.
But why do you say he didn't bring in new blood? You know, he brought in people like Mangaliso Ndlovu, he brought in Kirsty Coventry, he brought in these people that, I mean, Kirsty Coventry, when he was appointed, you know, there was a lot of hope, wasn't there?
Yeah, true. This is why I'm saying he should now learn from his first term that it's not just about being young. What is it that what have you achieved? What can you offer? You know, he has learned from that experience. Of course, I mean, Kirsty was an Olympic medalist, but you know, I think he can do better this time. We now know that being a Harvard or an Oxford trained professor in economics does not make you a good Minister of Finance. You know, there's a lot to choose from. So it is his responsibility. But like I said, Blessed, if he was clever, he would then go out there and say to his advisors, guys, I want to finish this with a bang. You know, who do I appoint? Because expectations are high, Blessed. They are very high. Yeah.
Does he have people to trust? I mean, given the history that we have known in ZANU-PF, where those in ZANU-PF are only loyal to power itself. And they know, most of those people who have won, who are in parliament, who are eligible to be appointed for ministerial posts, they know that in the next 5 years, someone else will be in power.
True.
And they would want to be in that cabinet too. Would they be loyal to him?
Not necessarily, but they will be loyal to the people of Zimbabwe. They'll be loyal to the dictates and the demands of the generation they are leading. Because if you look at his old PAC, the Provincial Advisory Committee, it was very cleverly selected. You know, there were great minds in there. And I'm saying, why not go back to that kind of pool of people and say, guys, you know, because rewarding political loyalty does not bring bread to the table of the nation. It brings the table to the loyalists, to the henchmen and the crony.
But if you're not loyal to your political party, are you not setting yourself up to start something like a vote of no confidence, like a recall and stuff like that?
No, because the constitution really won't, because the political dynamics in the House of Assembly are completely different from what you have in the cabinet. Here, I'm concerned mostly about the delivery, the cabinet delivery, the economy, the political environment, and everything else. I'm saying, you talked about a legacy, and if really he had good advisors, they would say to him, you are about to leave the political landscape. Don't be like your predecessor Mugabe, who died complaining and grumpy and blaming you. Think about your children. Think about your nieces and nephews. What are they going to say about their grandfather, about their father? And that makes you change your focus from appointing based on political loyalty and focusing mostly on delivery. We want people that can deliver. You want to sit in a cabinet that can run this country in your absence. And that will take introspection and humility. And if he doesn't have that, like I said, his finishing is going to be a whimper, and he's going to set himself and his family for blame for years to come.
I mean, looking at the people who are around him, who do you think could be an advisor of not who he should be listening to right now?
Do you know, Blessed, at one time, I've got, my work in civil society, allows me to pick up phones and talk to everybody, because there's no political affiliation in my world. Everything that I say, even it sounds partisan, it's by coincidence. I once had tea with Eddie Cross, he's a friend of mine. And I'm like, Eddie, you are very friendly to Edie, and you write lots and lots of sense, Why is it that advice is not percolating to these guys, And he says to me, understand that politicians have two lives. They have the professional lives that they talk about at the World Economic Forum, billion-dollar economy, all that mega deals, and so forth, middle income economy by 2030. And there's the political side that focuses on benevolence and rewarding loyalty. So when you advise a president, you can't force them to take your advice. So the ability for Emmerson Mnangagwa to absorb advice is going to define his credibility in the next 5 years. Because remember, already his election has been disputed. So if he performs so well, because the economy is so big, and it makes people stupid in the sense that their memories get to be shorter. I've lived in African countries where the politics is rotten, but the economics is very good. If you go to Rwanda, the politics is bad, but the economics is good. If you go to Kenya, the politics is bad, but the economy is good. Even Egypt, even South Africa. So you need advisors who can say to you, can you demarcate between political loyalty and economic delivery? Make your people happy, lots and lots of money in their pockets, strong currency, access to housing, quality water, and all that. The kind of things that Triple C is talking about can be done by ZANU-PF, but they can only be done if ED listens to advise that there is a difference between political loyalty and delivery when you make your appointments. The kind of thing that even CCC will suffer from in running its cities and towns. They should differentiate between loyalty and delivery. And once they do that, once they cross that bridge, you can be a dictator as much as you want, like the Chinese Communist Party, blessed. There's no democracy in China. But China is one of the biggest economies in the world. There's no democracy in Rwanda, but the Rwandese are sitting pretty. So you can, if you are a clever nationalist, you can understand that when I'm making cabinet appointments, let me differentiate between political loyalty and delivery, and you can win.
Amazing. But
Do I sound like a good advisor to you? Right.
But let's look at his presidential spokesperson George Charamba. He spoke for Mugabe. He's speaking for President Emmerson Mnangagwa, and he comes across with such a harsh tone, such an attack to critics of government. Is that a presidential spokesperson?
In the first place, why was he even taken up as a presidential spokesperson
Maybe
for
it's good.
Yeah, he's good, but he wasn't, when he was talking for Mugabe, he wasn't as hardline as he is now. So you can sense that he's now very defensive, hitting out at anything that seems to be, any political target that moves. So in other words, he is bad for international politics. He is bad for brand Zimbabwe. Because if Mnangagwa himself has not done a press conference to say, guys, whilst I understand what SADC is saying, you know, I don't run ZEC. ZEC is an independent institution. You see, there is diplomacy in this language. You know, now to go out there and start attacking SADC and saying SADC is Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe SADC, it shows that you don't understand what it is to be a spokesperson for a political national leader. You know, so I am not saying he is a bad person, but I'm saying he needs to culture himself in the way that he expresses himself, because this kind of high-level politics has a lot of diplomacy. This is why even the United Nations cannot come out guns blazing saying to ED, you are totally illegitimate, because they are waiting for the processes in SADC to play out themselves. So meanwhile, you can say, we congratulate you, but the corridors of power in the UN understand what is happening. So George Charamba, I think he needs to understand that the political brand of Emmerson Mnangagwa depends on what people he works with say about him. So insulting SADC and throwing brick bets at neighbors Mumba does not enhance the brand of Mnangagwa, because it is already damaged. These elections have damaged his brand. All the goodwill that he had accumulated since 2018 has been destroyed now by these elections. So this is the right time to have a sober person who can be able to, what we call it, damage control. You don't exacerbate the situation as bad as it already that is bad. So he is a bad spokesperson. So if ED was clever, I think he would replace this man and put somebody who is more sober in the way they understand international diplomacy.
Now, do you expect any miracles or any shock in the cabinet? Maybe I'm hoping that by the time we air this, the cabinet would not have been announced. But let's talk about it.
You are going to get the shortest answer in your interview. No. What I've been expressing myself was a wishful, extrapolation that if ED wanted to finish this thing with a bang, this is what he would do. But like I'm saying, it is very possible that he will want also to have a compliant cabinet, because the cabinet is the one that controls the national fiscus in a way. The cabinet is one that controls the national security. So money and security are very important in the next 5 years. And those can only be given to him, accorded to him, by a compliant cabinet. But a compliant cabinet, Blessed, is never going to deliver for the young people that we're talking about. The generation of 5 million young people that are well-schooled and educated and ready to work are not going to be satisfied by a compliant cabinet. You want a revolutionary cabinet, a cabinet that can turn things around. But because of the political insecurity that possibly this man is going to experience in the next 5 years, I think he's going to be safe with a compliant cabinet, and it's a tragedy for this country.
Let me just turn you to Nelson Chamisa. Say, what does these next 5 years look like?
Well, look, when I'm listening to him, he's obviously very hurt because he was confident that for the first time, despite the electoral shenanigans, he was going to make it. But as the communists always say, the one who announces the results is more important than not the one who counts the ballot papers. Nelson is very young, right? And he still has an opportunity to reinvent himself. One thing that I should say is that there have been a lot of things that have been said by his style of management as an individual, right? That has nothing to do with the voters, because the voters look at the Triple C brand and they say, we are voting for Nelson, right? But then you can also argue that perhaps the way that he understands, life and things could have had an effect in the way that the elections transpired. We don't know. We know what happens at ZEC and so forth. Yeah. So I'm saying to Nelson, losing an election and you are less than 50 years old, probably not even 45, is a good way of starting a new life. You self-introspection to say, what is it about me that could have contributed to this loss? Is there anything that my personality, my way of running things, that affects the way? Remember, there are about 3 million people that didn't vote in this country, out of 6-7 million. So could it be that those 3 million people would have voted if I had done things differently? So you are not blaming yourself, you are not blaming anybody, but to blame everybody else except you is not a good way of doing business. Because I was saying that in the belly that in other words, fumo rinobaya rizikandi. A spear might be very good and sharp, but it will wait for somebody to take it and throw it. So he is a sharp spear, but he can't throw himself, So when you are listening to his colleagues, to his friends, remember, Blessed, I've been in this for quite some time. I listen to people speak and his friends, and there is a need for self-introspection and transformation. To say the next election, even if SADC does not give me this election, which I deserve, mind you, we are not saying he deserves it, but let me go through a period of self-introspection. Let me transform the way that I do things. Let me change the way that I work with my colleagues. Let me change the way that I relate to my seniors. Perhaps they could be changed. I mean, it's very important for him to do that. But he should remain in the race. He should remain committed. This is not the first time. Lionel Messi lost the World Cup about 3 or 4 times, if I can remember, until he won it last time. So there is always an opportunity to win. But get out of your skin and respect the opinion of everybody else around you. Listen to what the people say and get those 3 million people that have not voted to come onto the voters' roll. And that is to do with the way that you present yourself So he has got hope, he has got the right attitude, he's got the right brand, but it now depends on the way that he presents himself into the future.
All right. Rejoice, I'll just take you to one of your writings.
Right.
You were writing in the Newsday, and you wrote, if one goes further back into human history, there's evidence that primitive mankind thrived on military conquest, and the fruits of prevailing over another nation was enslavement of the vanquished.
Mm.
This is back in history.
Back in history.
Now, in the present, don't we still see people thriving on military conquest, even when there are elections, and enslavement of the vanquished?
We are talking ideas now, Blessed. We are no longer talking spears and mortar bombs here. Remember, initially I was talking about the way that revolutions and nationalism has changed from, the Hondoye Minda, riots in the streets to artificial intelligence, 3G. Mm. So, because you cannot have an idea that is sustainable, that does not dominate somebody. The fact that Facebook or whatever or Meta is dominant is because it has vanquished other concepts.
But we see people being arrested, detained, jailed right now, use of force. And you're talking about back in history, and I'm asking, is it still not the same where physical force has been used? And when, like for instance, ZANU-PF has won this election, but it has not tired in jailing those who speak against it.
That's true. One you make a very good observation. One reason why liberalism talks about fear of large government, because government has always been seen as an instrument of repression. Because when you are in power, you have all these instruments at your disposal. You can arrest, you can jail people, you can execute them. But like I'm saying, Blessed, that, generations change. You still need to have an idea that dominates the political and the economic landscape, whether it is an ideology or not. But if you are in power and you are a liberal, you should not use that authority, that military authority, to withdraw the freedoms and the rights of the individuals. Because domination does not mean repression. It might mean control, but it does not mean repression. You can still allow yourself, as a government, to allow your citizens to express themselves without militant coercion. But that is primitive history that I was talking about. Mm-hmm. But it's manifesting itself already as we speak now. You know that in Niger, there is a military government. Although some people believe that militancy can be democratized. But that is not this current generation, because the current generation understands the militancy as military domination, the ability to jail people. But I think the domination that I'm talking about now, although it was primitive, if I would rewrite that statement, really, I would talk about the domination of ideas and the imposition of supreme ideas, but allowing citizens and individuals to debate those ideas and implement them in the best way that suits them.
Mm. So again here, I'll revert to your writing, quite stimulating. I used to read so much every time you wrote. You say freedom is as much physical as it is mental. What this means is that we liberals, we reconfigure our perception as well, so that we preach the gospel of free markets, constitutionalism, rule of law, small government, property rights, etc. We should appeal to one's intellect without emphasizing the material outcomes.
Absolutely.
Amazing. This is a rich statement. It goes to the core of constitutionalism, rule of law. Something that we're missing.
We are missing quite a lot now, because when I wrote that statement, I'm always listening to ZANU-PF saying we brought freedom, democracy, and independence to Zimbabwe. Right? Okay, that's true, because the Smith regime was not necessarily democratic, and we were free to do other things, but not everything that we were free to do. So when ZANU-PF talks about freedom, they're talking about physical freedom. In other words, freedom from colonial repression. That's why they keep on talking about, neocolonialism, the domination of white supremacy and all, because that's his physical side. When they talk about democracy, when they say we brought democracy, they mean we brought one man, one vote, majority rule, which is okay. I mean, they brought all that. We were talking about it during the war. We want one man, one vote, right? We brought freedom and we gave you farms, right? Okay, we all fought for land and all that. We understand that. But the way that we understand freedom is in the mind now. Am I really free to be what I want to be in Zimbabwe? Am I free to express myself? Even if I have a farm, how much freedom do I have to derive maximum benefit out of it if I don't have title deeds? Even if I am voting, am I sure that my vote is going to count? So this cosmic level of understanding freedom is what ZANU-PF do not have. They are focusing on the physical. This is why they are saying, Job, we were scholar, we fought for you to be able to afford university education. But if you say anything against us, we are going to jail you. They don't understand that privilege he has to say whatever he's saying is part of the freedom, is an extension of freedom. So as a liberal, I don't get excited by not being jailed if I say something. I get excited by my idea being allowed to express itself. I get excited when the public media can come to me and say, hey, you always talk about the free markets and property rights and all that. What does it mean to the individual? So you can see that we are moving, my liberal thinking in terms of freedom and democracy moves away from the physical realm, which ZANU-PF talks about. We removed you from enslavement, which they did with the help of the villagers. But they forgot to redefine freedom, which is what Joshua Nkomo was saying, that, okay, you guys, we have given us one man, one vote. But how do we use that vote? What is that vote doing for me? Does it have an impact on my disposable income? Unfortunately not. So this is the level at which I discuss freedom when I'm talking to even students of liberalism, Blessed.
Now, I want to thank you very much for joining me, Rejoice Ngwenya, and for sharing these insights with our viewers and myself here on the Free Talk in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. But Rejoice, before you leave, I will ask you to speak from your heart, just to look at the people, our viewers, the people of Zimbabwe, and share with them, thoughts from your heart. Maybe something that we did not discuss, but you feel strongly that you need to talk about.
My friends and colleagues, I know that you might be hurt that for now, most of you might be having a government that you feel you have not voted for. But do not lose hope, because we also had that feeling in the 1970s when we were under Rhodesian rule. What we have to do now, especially to the young people, get yourselves out of the fear factor. Be able to confront the system and say to the system, this is the way that we want our lives to be. You define your own future, your own circumstances, because we, the old generation, can't do that for you. So get out of your fear factor, define your parameters, and ensure that they are delivered within your space. And this is the way that the future can transpire for you.
I want to thank you very much, Rejoice Ngwenya. Now, I will, revert back to your writings. Here you write, in Zimbabwe, the late authoritarian dictator Robert Mugabe convinced millions of gullible citizens that if he expropriated land from racist white commercial farmers in court, his land reform policy would radically transform the economic fortunes of the majority of black citizens. It seems the cycle of deceitful falsehoods continues. Even today, with incumbent President Emmerson Mnangagwa, when he deposed Mugabe in a November 2017 military coup, Mnangagwa told enthusiastic crowds that his era of governance would render illegal Western sanctions ineffective because the country would be rebuilt with its own people. In vernacular, it's nyika inovakwa nevenevayo. Mnangagwa is facing another tough election a few months from now. Meanwhile, he and his apologists are blaming illegal Western sanctions for his governance failure. On every local, regional, continental, global forum, Mnangagwa and his surrogates are at pains to convince those who care to listen how Zimbabwe would have excelled had it not been for illegal Western sanctions. But just like brain damage in adults whose motor and spinal functions can be recovered if undamaged neurons are stimulated to create an intervention, damaged perception of liberal freedom can be repaired, however, with a lot of work. Well, this is Rejoice Ngwenya, controversial writing, but inspiring and mind motivating. Now, this is the Free Talk, and the program, this is what we inspire to do, to appeal to the minds, to motivate Zimbabweans to get thinking so that we better our own nation, because it is our country after all. We don't seek to impose our ideas. We seek to debate yours. We don't seek to push you in any certain direction. but we seek to create a table for dialogue so that together we push the direction for this country, of this country, for our children, their children, and their children's children. Because at my age, maybe at Rejoice's age, if we have failed, we have failed. What we seek to do is to improve that for those who still have the energy, the vigor, and motivation to take our country forward. I strongly believe, as Blessed Mhlanga, I strongly believe that this country is great, can be better than it is, only if we speak together, one voice, in freedom, in unison, and allow each other to develop. Now, until next time, thank you very much for joining me on this, the Free Talk, in proud partnership with the Frederick Newman Foundation for Freedom. And I, your host as usual, Dara B, was in conversation with Mudara Rejoice Ngwenya. Thank you very much. So there's a difference between Dara B and Mudara.
You always stress that.